So, God bless you and thank you for joining me. We want to talk about these healing scriptures. I have asterisked a couple of those because it says specifically that Jesus goes into the synagogue. Now, these are all examples of healing in scripture. There are others with Jesus, but in these specific examples, the only one going into the synagogue and healing was Jesus. So we're going to look at these, and there are others, and that's what we're going to do tomorrow as well. So thank you for joining me. Okay, I'm using the book of Mark because they're just kind of in order, boom, 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 and certainly many of these healings are in the other gospels. So for example, Simon Peter's mother-in-law, you know that story. That's also in Matthew and it's also in Luke, but we're just going to start here in the book of Mark. Okay, so the first one is Mark 1, verses 21 through 28, and it says this: They went to Capernaum, and when the Sabbath came, he entered the synagogue and taught. They were astounded at his teaching, for he taught them as one having authority and not just as the scribes. Just then was in their synagogue a man with an unclean spirit, and he cried out, "What have you to do with us, Jesus of Nazareth? Have you come to destroy us? I know who you are, the Holy One of God." But Jesus rebuked him, saying, "Be silent and come out of him." And the unclean spirit, convulsing him and crying with a loud voice, came out of him. And they were all amazed, and they kept on asking one another, "What is this? A new teaching with authority? He commands even the unclean spirits, and they obey him." At once his fame began to spread throughout the surrounding region of Galilee. So that speaks about the synagogue, and Jesus is the only one in there. The story of Simon Peter's mother-in-law starts in verse 29. It says, "As soon as they left the synagogue, they entered the house of Simon and Andrew with James and John. Simon Peter's mother-in-law, she's in bed with a fever, you know the story. And that goes on to say that the whole city was gathered around the door, and he cured many who were sick with various diseases, cast out many demons, etc. There's the story of the leper in Mark 1, verses 40 through 45. And I would suggest that you actually look all of these up yourself, because we certainly don't have time to read all of these. The story of the paralytic, Mark 2, verses 1 through 12. I want to share the man with the withered hand from Mark 3, verses 1 through 6. Again, he entered the synagogue, and a man was there with a withered hand. They watched him to see whether he would cure him on the Sabbath, so that they might accuse him. And he said to the man who had the withered hand, "Come forward." Then he said to them, "Is it lawful to do good or to harm on the Sabbath, to save life or to kill?" But they were silent. He looked around at them with anger. He was grieved at their hardness of heart and said to the man, "Stretch out your hand." He stretched it out, and his hand was restored. The Pharisees went out and immediately conspired with the Herodians against him, how to destroy him. There is the story of the demoniac in Mark, verses 1 through 13 of Mark 5, and then the woman with the issue of the blood. You know that story, where she touches the hem of his garment and she is healed. In Mark 7, there is a demon in a girl, and that is verses 24 through 30. There's a deaf man. Also in Mark 7, verses 31 through 35. Let's go to Mark 8, and this is verses 22 through 25. This is Jesus curing a blind man in Bethsaida. They came to Bethsaida. Some people brought a blind man to him and begged him to touch him. He took the blind man by the hand and led him out of the village. And when he had put saliva in his eyes, he laid his hands on him and asked him, "Can you see anything?" And the people looked up and said, and the man looked up and said, "I can see people, but they look just like trees walking." Then Jesus laid his hands on his eyes again, and he looked intently at and his sight was restored, and he saw everything clearly. So we've got more healing verses to look at tomorrow. Armor up, we ride at dawn. May God bless you as always. Have a great day.